Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our phishing brief. My name is Mike Hampfelt. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Vice President and Partner at Compro Managed Business Solutions, and we are a managed IT and print provider with offices in Vancouver and Surrey. We also support customers through our service network across Canada and parts of the US. So we're very proud sponsors of the BC Legal Management Association, and it's so great to see so many members on the webinar. There are a few non-legal participants joining us today. Now, there are some stats in the presentation or the webinar that are specific to the legal industry, but fear not, the same trends apply. And if you'd like some stats specific to your industry, after the webinar, we'd be happy to provide those. So before I pass it over to Steve and allow Steve to introduce himself as our guest speaker and tell you a little about IrontVest, I'd like to give you a little brief history of how I met Steve and became familiar with IrontVest. Every year, either myself or another team member travel to tech and security conventions, looking for the latest solutions that are accessible for our clients in terms of budget and complexity. And I met Steve at one of these conventions, and quite quickly we got into a discussion about phishing, which is not difficult because I love talking about IT security. And I was telling that most of the solutions I was seeing at this convention were kind of improvements on existing solutions that had come out. Improvements in phishing simulation, training had become more user-friendly. But at that point, phishing simulation and training had almost become a bare minimum for those people who are really concerned with phishing as far as IT security. So I was telling Steve it didn't solve a very specific issue that a number of my customers face, and I face as well as a business owner, as a risk manager, which is, there was always going to be those team members, typically longer tenured, been with the company for a long time, often business owners who are susceptible to clicking a bad link. The ones that are always at the bottom of your phishing simulator scores if you have phishing simulators in place. And so the question that's always posed, are you going to let go of these long tenured employees? Typically not. Typically what risk managers do is they have to accept the risk that these employees represent because they feel the value they add is greater than the risk. And I was hoping to find a product or a solution or understand what's out there in the security space to make it so that risk managers don't have to make this choice. So that's when I met Steve, and he was telling me a lot about advancements in AI and scripting in the phishing security space. And so it made sense when we thought about phishing as a webinar that IrontVest come and sort of educate us on the topic. So I hope everyone leaves here today with a kind of a basic understanding of what to look for in phishing campaigns, get to see some real life examples to see that can happen to anybody, and an understanding of what solutions are out there so that when you're talking to your internal IT department, or maybe you're talking to your outsourced IT provider, you can ask them, say, hey, what are we doing in this space? And you can have some sort of baseline understanding of what is possible. So with that being said, I'd love to pass it over to Steve from IrontVest. Steve, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure, Mike. Thanks for having me. And hi, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to get together and chat with you today. As Mike said, we had a great time having some discussions around phishing and this space, and we're really proud to be a vendor partner for Compro and the good work that they're doing up there and helping you protect your companies. So my goal was to keep the presentation piece of this to about 15 minutes, just a little bit of education, hopefully a couple of thought-provoking things, and then leave some time at the end where we could have any conversation you want to have around phishing or cybersecurity in general. Okay. With that, I'll keep the introduction to IrontVest very short. This is basically, our motto is to protect your employees. You need to secure your enterprise or secure your firm. And we really, we have a number of products, but we really focus on two problems. And those are the problems of compromised credentials and phishing, right? And because between those two vectors, if you will, a lot of bad things happen. Bad actors can get in and do a lot of bad things. IrontVest has been around since January of 2022, and we're about a 40-person strong company, very well funded, and with a group that's very senior in cybersecurity. Our lead founder and CEO, Avi Turgeman, was the inventor of behavioral biometrics and the founder of a company called BioCatch. And I worked for Avi at BioCatch. Lots of our engineering team has a long history in cybersecurity and development of cybersecurity solutions, some of it going back 20 years or so. But this company, what we really wanted to do was, we've been working with banks for years, and we wanted to take a different approach and not just protect the enterprise, the banking enterprise, but look to see how could we protect the mid-market and the mom and pop companies by helping them secure this critical vulnerability point. And that's the need for their employees to get online, leave the protected environment, and do business. So that's really where we're focused. So let's jump into phishing as a topic here. So assume everybody on this call is aware of phishing, you understand it, but just to quickly level set, what we're talking about with phishing is through a number of tactics. Could be text, could be voice, could be email being the primary vector. A bad actor is going to try to socially engineer an employee to give up access or information, right? And so if you look at our little flow chart on the right of the screen, it typically starts with a fake email. Hey, you need to reauthorize your Microsoft account. Click here to log in, and then the employee, through no fault of their own, is faked into giving up maybe their access credentials to an internal system or information that the threat actor can use to get into the system. And really, once they're in, and sometimes they could be in the system for months before they create an action that's detectable. But once they're in, they start up-leveling permissions. They really can be dangerous and lead to a lot of bad things like data breaches, ransomware. And the stats in this space are really scary, so that
looks like we lost. Steve, I don't know if anyone else experienced, but Steve, I think you froze there just for a second. You were just about to go over average cost of data breach.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so average cost of data breach is, for a company is $4.5 million. And like I said, sometimes it's up to 300 days before you even identify and realize that you've been infiltrated and you've had these problems. So this is, unfortunately, this is some really serious stuff while 90% of attacks start with phishing, email security usually gets around 8 to 9% of the IT security budget. So this is an area where we really need to think differently about what we're providing to protect our organization and our employees. Mike, can you still hear me okay? Thumbs up. Yeah, good. So some more good news. Law firms are a primary target for this phishing activity and for the data breach work that results from it. And the reason for that is, by the nature of your work, you're a treasure trove of sensitive and confidential information, right? There's a honeypot, and often distributed honeypots of really important and confidential data that, once in the hands of a threat actor, can be ransomed and used for bad things. So unfortunately, and there's some news stories here, happy to share these links and articles with you, but law firms are a top target. And if you just look at the statistics on the left-hand side of the screen, they're pretty frightening, right? Just the 57% year-over-year increase in the number of legal firms that have experienced a breach, right? And know that they've experienced a breach and reported that breach, right? So that's imagine how many else have been breached and just don't know it yet, right? So big problems here. Let's get into a little bit of the phishing tactics themselves. And I just want to throw this question out to everybody on the call. You don't have to come off mute and answer. If you want to use your little participation icon, you can. But has anybody ever scanned a QR code in a restaurant? And Mike, have you ever scanned a QR code in a restaurant?
Yeah, I know why you're asking this, because when we met, I mean, I thought I was all up on the latest, tactics, and I'm pretty security aware, changing my passwords, using MFA. And when you asked me this question right away, I was like, oh crap, you're kidding me. I didn't even think about this. So I thought to myself, as someone who's really aware in this space, just the innovation that when something is changing in sort of our macro environment. So in terms of just the way in which we go to a restaurant, how quickly people adjust their strategies to take advantage of it. So yeah, I'm not surprised you're asking that, Steve.
Yeah, and it's just it's a very just kind of great example of how clever these threat actors are, right? And so we all experienced COVID, and when we were able to finally go back out to a restaurant, there was all this touchless service, including no more menus, but a convenient QR code that you can scan. Well, it's very easy for a hacker to go, create a QR code sticker, place over the legitimate sticker, send you to a false website that looks like the restaurant's website, ask you to sign up, create a username and password, knowing that you're going to reuse passwords that you use in your sensitive accounts, and harvest information from you, right? And then send you on to the menu so you never even knew it happened, right? And so just as an example of, it's not just a person's inattention that allows them to click on a bad link. It's not that we're not paying attention. It's that we're up against some really clever folks that are trying to get to that information. So,
and Steve, if you don't mind me interjecting, so many of our customers have asked us to do dark web scans for them, scans, sorry. And what we found is it's not always like hacking has become an industry, right? And it's there's an entire supply chain of that data. And so there are organizations where they monetize your information by selling it to marketplaces on the dark web. And you can literally type in your credentials and see, well, hey, this is a common password that someone that uses this domain or this credential uses. And then that marketplace generates income by supplying memberships to that marketplace, and so on and so forth. So oftentimes these hackers are using phishing not just to get on to your network and hack you, but also to provide this to really advanced threat actors. And this is something, as I've gotten in the space, that has just been so scary, but also quite fascinating, that it's a full-blown industry with it's quite interesting. And then with the QR code, although I'm not scanning QR codes at work, I started to realize, well, someone can start to understand my behaviors and then figure out where I work and use that to sort of gain access into my my critical information in my workplace.
Yeah, just great point. Yeah, there's you can buy phishing kits, phishing as a service on the dark web, companies that will go out and and do phishing attacks on your behalf, right, and provide you with the results of that labor. I'm going to show just a 90-second video here, and this is a real testimonial of the victim of a phishing attack. And I think what it illustrates for me is, it isn't the inattention of the employee that, in this case specifically, that led to the victimization of the company. So let me play this for you real quick. And Mike, when the video starts playing, just give me a thumbs up that that everything is playing according to plan here.
It all started when I received an email from Sally, one of our vendors.
Mm-hmm.
She said that due to COVID, they are no longer accepting paper checks anymore, and that we needed to use wire transfer instead.
Steve, we have sound but no video.
$900,000.
So you have sound but no video? Let me I think I can correct that here. Can you see, can you see the video now?
It all started when I received an email from Sally, one of our vendors. She said that due to COVID, they are no longer accepting paper checks anymore and that we needed to use wire transfer instead. She said we owed $900,000. This is a lot of money. So obviously, my first reaction was to verify this. I looked it up in our system and it was true. We did. And it's not like it was a brand new email, it was a response to an email thread we had going on for months. Even her email address checked out. But since I've never spoken to Sally, I decided to give her a call. She told me she is working from home just like everyone else these days and confirmed that the wire transfer was, in fact, the new policy. I asked her to send me the wire transfer info so I could set it up in our system and submit payment. It wasn't until days later that we realized we were scammed. But how? Like, I did everything I was supposed to. What I didn't know was that Sally's email was hacked and the scammers copied her entire inbox to a fake domain that looked almost identical to Sally's real email. Now, because they had the full inbox, they were able to reply to the email chains. And because I called the number in the email, the fake Sally answered. Meanwhile, the real Sally had no clue what was going on because the conversation continued from the fake inbox. Since then, I never trust email, and neither should you. But here's a few tips so you don't do what I did. Always call the number in your vendor management system to verify any request to change any info, including phone number, address, and obviously bank info. Also, ask for a bank certification to verify that it matches the vendor.
So let me just do the little shuffle back here to the other presentation. All right, I think we're, Mike, can you see my my screen again?
Yep, looks good.
All right, great. Yeah, so I think it's and that was what our awareness training, our security awareness training platform. That's one of the many videos we have in there. But I think what it really does for me is it's not that the poor accounts payable person was inattentive or not security aware. It was that we weren't, as an organization, providing tools that were alerting her to the potential, phishing attack that was happening. In this case, a domain spoof, right? That was happening.
Steve, I have quite a fascinating example. This was a number of years ago. I was doing, I was in the process of valuing another business, and we're doing due diligence. And one key area of the business was kind of out of whack. So their costs, for their, basically their sales costs were out of whack. And I was showing the owners of the company this, and what they realized is that they were overpaying a vendor called Synex. And I don't know if everyone's up in Canada. Most companies buy their hardware through Synex or Ingram, and their controller was receiving invoices that looked identical to their historical invoices, and were just paying them as she had done for 15 years. And so somehow these threat actors got a handle of their previous invoices and just created a fake domain that looked like TD Synex, and ended up being roughly $650,000 over the course of 2 years, 3 years, which is significant for a small business. So anyways, I've seen it so many times. And which is one of the reasons why maybe I'm a bit paranoid.
Well, and I hope those of you that are on the call and hear about this topic, I hope these examples are helpful, and just narrating the story internally with others that need to know what a real problem this is, and how vulnerable we all are to it. And let's talk about that domain spoofing, right? So are these real email addresses? Right? The answer is no. None of these are real email addresses. All of these are email addresses that have used in recent phishing attacks that we've detected, right? And some of them look exactly right. They're not misspelled, but they're just not email domains that Verizon uses, for example. Verizon doesn't use VerizonConnect.com as a domain. So a hacker went out and got that domain. And American Airlines, if it's hard to even notice because our brains autocorrect spelling errors, right? And AmericanAirlines.com, it's an M instead of an N there. So it's AmericanAirlines.com. Your brain is trained, we're wired to autocorrect that, to solve that problem and read what's supposed to be there. And so these are some examples that are, somewhat undetectable by just good behavior, right? So let's talk a little bit about the Dropbox attack that was in the news recently. This happened in Q4 of last year, but it was a very significant breach. And what happens was it started with phishing attacks, right? And so a targeted phishing attack against Dropbox employees, specifically their development and IT teams, where they were pretending to be a trusted third party, Circle CI, which is an application, a web application that many of their developers use, as part of their software development process, right? And so they were able to send emails that looked legitimate from fake Circle CI domains. Here's a list of the domains that were used. And we call this an Abagnale attack, which is, if anyone ever watched the Catch Me If You Can movie, where the person Leonardo DiCaprio pretended to be an airline pilot, right? Like that person who's Frank Abagnale is actually now kind of a cybersecurity guy, but this is an impersonation attack, right? So we're going to pretend to be Circle CI. We've got all of these domains that look legitimate, and we're going to go in and try to harvest some credentials so we can get into the system, up-level our permissions, and then eventually breach the organization and hold them for ransom. And that's exactly what happened at Dropbox. Now, this is an interesting statement from their CEO. And think about Dropbox as not a small business. This is a large enterprise, tons of resources in IT security, right? And they're saying that, look, we know it's impossible for humans to detect every phishing lure, right? And that people must answer emails and provide information as part of their job, right? We can't stop doing business. We need to communicate with customers and vendors and people outside the organization. And this is precisely why phishing is so effective, right? So as the threats grow more sophisticated, the more important these controls become, right? And so what I'd like to talk to you now a little bit about is what does good look like? Like, what does best in class look like around email security controls? Okay. And it all starts with a really well-tuned secure email gateway. They're called SEGs, secure email gateways. Some of the industry leading players in that space are companies like Proofpoint and Mimecast. And these were initially designed as spam filters, right? But they've been modified over the years to really look for and detect phishing, right? And they do a good job. It's a necessary tool in the arsenal. They detect and stop from getting to the inbox about 75% of all phishing attacks. Okay. And that's excellent. And the reason that they can't stop 100% is because, just so we had spoken about, they have to let legitimate email in. We have to let first-time sender emails through and check, and because that's a lot of the business we do requires that we have an open communication channel with the outside world. So you can tune these controls, but at best, you're getting about 75% blockage of the phishing. And often what makes it through are the sophisticated attacks that are tuned to beat these controls, right? There are simple controls around email hygiene, which you may have heard things like DMARC, DKIM, SPF. These are all kind of email hygiene points that the gateway can check for. And if it's a hastily set up website that doesn't have good hygiene there, then it's flagged potentially phishing, right? And so it can stop things like that. But the really sophisticated folks understand these controls, understand the levers on Proofpoint that they can dial. They probably use Proofpoint in their own phishing enterprise to keep phishing out of their organization. So they know the rules, so they can defeat the rules, right? So what happens next? Now we're talking about email that's made it through the gateway. What do we do? Well, there's one more level of technical controls that is expensive but very useful, and I'll call this the detection and quarantining layer of an effective email security system. And if you look here, the analogy we're using, think of the layered approach in email security as putting Swiss cheese on a sandwich, right? If I have one piece of Swiss cheese, there's holes that we can get through easily. But if I layer 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of Swiss cheese, the layers potentially block all of the holes, right? So the best practice here is to have a layered approach to email security. That next technical layer would be detection and quarantining. So these are services that might be disabling links, disabling the PDFs, deconstructing and reconstructing attachments so that there can be no malicious links inside there. These tools tend to be fairly expensive, but very, very useful for the companies that have resources that can afford them. And you tend to see these in larger enterprise organizations, right? Most mid-market and small businesses can't afford these tools. But even these tools do not provide you 100% protection. If you look to say, okay, well, what gets through these 2 layers and makes it to the employee's inbox? 1 to 2% of all emails in the inbox are phishing. And that's if you have really good email security. We've done vulnerability assignments where we found up to 20% of the inbox is phishing emails, believe it or not. So what do? Despite these technical tools, phishing ends up in the employee's inbox. So we have to protect the human factor. And there's 3 layers to protecting the human factor. One is awareness training. You have to have a culture of security awareness across your organization. And the best way to do that is by having frequent and effective training program. So it's one of the layers we provide. I showed you a little snippet of one of our training programs, but let's make sure that everybody knows what to be on the lookout for and that they've got this in their mind as they're conducting their work. The next thing that's very effective is to have some simulation. Let's do some fire drills. Let's test. Let's put some fake phishing into the system and see, is anybody clicking? Where is there an opportunity for us to do some retraining, some honing of our understanding and our paying attention? And that I'll call that the simulation or the gaming layer there. We're testing the knowledge. Very important that you have that. If the security awareness and simulation training, as Mike had mentioned, there's a lot of providers out there. We're one of them, but there's a lot of providers out there with that functionality. And what the industry will tell you is after a year of effective security awareness training and simulation, you take those in your organization that are vulnerable to a phishing click from 37% at the beginning of the year down to 5 or 6%, but not to 0. Right. So 5 or 6% of your workforce is still vulnerable to clicking even after a year of effective training. So there's this last layer, and this is a layer that's kind of unique to us, but there are other solutions coming to the market. And this is a contextual inbox alerting for the employee. So think about, okay, so in my inbox now, I have what's in the bottom right-hand side of the screen here. I have a flag that tells me, hey, there might be something wrong with this email. And then I have a panel on the right-hand side that says, in plain English, not technical talk, here's all the reasons why this email might be suspicious. Not just a generic first-time sender yellow box that everybody ignores, but there's 3 or 4 things of note in here that may or may not be obvious to you, the user trying to do business. One of them is, hey, it's a spoof domain. Another one might be, there's some real trouble in where this email has been bouncing around, servers in Zimbabwe. Doesn't sound like the real vendor that they're claiming to be. Things like that, just real contextual information to help the employee pause and make the right decision before they click. And this is where you get not just a gotcha game of simulation, but real time, every day in the inbox. We're partners with the security team, and we're in this together to try to keep this stuff out of our inbox. Okay. And I want to get to questions here. I know we've run a little bit long, but Mike and I have a special offer for folks on the phone or on the webinar. And this is just, we have the opportunity, we have the ability to deploy this tool and look at what's in the inbox today, what's defeating the current controls, and what's the current level of email security risk that you have as an organization. We do this for Compro, with Compro and for them at no charge. And it's a valuable piece of customized data for you that just tells you, hey, this is what we found. And these are the areas, whether you deploy a new product or not, that you should be mindful of as you as you conduct your email security program at your organization.
And
Mike, anything you want to add to
Yes, Steve, one of the things, one of the reasons we really suggest it is everyone's risk tolerance is different, right? And everyone has has varying levels of acceptable risk. And so by just doing a vulnerability assessment, you can at least understand where you stand on this and say, okay, how much am I willing to invest? What is my risk tolerance? And quite often, I mean, for us, our job as IT security professionals is to inform and inform our clients, make suggestions. At times we take a hard line on things, but essentially we're there to consult our business partners. And so that really starts with an assessment. And yeah, it's great that this has been made available for those on the webinar. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, great. And there's some other resources too that you can find on our website, or if you want to email Mike or myself, be happy to send them to you. Just some thought leadership on best practices to avoid phishing attacks and what's happening in the industry. You can check out our blog. There's a lot of good information there as well that might be useful to you. And I hope this content today has been helpful. That's all we had in terms of content. Is there any do we have any questions?
I had Phil here monitoring the chat and I didn't see any, Steve. If anyone has any questions, you can pop them in the chat here where I kind of do an outro. But one of the things we wanted to provide was a short, punchy webinar. We're at 33, it'll probably be 35 minutes by the time we're done, because everyone's really busy and we all have a lot to do and a lot on our minds. And that's another thing that makes us vulnerable to these types of attacks, right? Because they're just, I mean, it's in our I would say 50% of the phone calls I get now are someone saying that my Amazon package didn't get delivered. Well, this is a form of phishing, right? So I hope you've taken something away from this. At least allow you to have some conversations with your team internally, talk to your internal IT department or your outsourced provider, and just ask the question, how are we doing in this space? And, what is our current risk level? And, again, to our BCLMA member firms, really appreciate you joining. Appreciate everyone joining the webinar. And Steve, thank you for a great presentation.
Thanks for having me, and good luck everyone in your security missions. Take care. Be safe.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.